you so much for being here on this very rainy day here in DC. Thrilled to have such a big crowd and such a fantastic lineup of speakers for our event today. It's actually a very special event for WITA. I think it's the first time ever we've had 3 of our past award winners from WITA, our WITA annual dinner. Rick Larsen and Charles Boustany are both recent winners, and Dooley, who's going to be in our panel discussion later, was not only an award winner from WITA, but has been an MC of our awards and given a keynote address at WITA events. So grateful to have you here as well, Cal. Thanks for everybody for being, this is the second event we're doing in this series on the trade wars. The first one 2 weeks ago, which you can find on our YouTube channel, talked about how we got here, what's happening in the Chinese economy, what's happening politically in China, and where are they headed. We thought we'd do that as predicate. Today we're going to be talking about what will be the impacts of a trade war, what are the impacts for constituencies, for companies, for workers, for the United States. And then we're going to be looking at playing out sort of how a trade war might play out in a future event in June is when we hope to do that, so kind of trade war games. So with that, I'm going to turn it in a second over to Dr. Boustany to moderate and have this discussion with Congressman Larsen. Remind folks that our WITA annual dinner is coming up in July. We announced our honorees recently, Senator Ben Cardin, Senator Pat Roberts, and just this week we announced that Secretary Sonny Perdue will be our third honoree. We only have 3 tables left, so if you are interested in being there, we hope to have you there. Please contact my colleague Diego Ennis. Information's in the back. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Boustany. Thank you so much, Charles, for doing this, for joining us. You've been at some WITA events besides the annual dinner. We're very grateful to have you. Thanks.
Thank you, Ken, and thank you to WITA for hosting this event. It's my distinct pleasure to introduce to you a good friend, Congressman Rick Larsen. And Rick's going to offer some perspective on where we are with this whole situation with China right now. But by way of introduction, Rick was elected to the U.S. House of Representatives in 2000. He represents Washington State's 2nd District, which is Northwest, right? It's pretty much the Northwest area. With Washington being a very trade-dependent state, nearly 40% of jobs related to trade, roughly 20 to 25% of the state's GDP is directly related to exports. Exports grew nearly 400% between 2000 and 2009 with China alone. This is a state that depends very heavily on trade in Asia, trade with China specifically, and so Rick is uniquely in a position to talk about what the impact would be. Also, Washington State is the home of Boeing, with I think 160 suppliers to Boeing.
Well, over 1,000 suppliers
In the state, but 160 in your district alone?
More than that.
Okay, more.
A
A lot
lot.
more. Okay. Old numbers. Rick is a member of the House Armed Services Committee and the Transportation Infrastructure Committee, where he serves as the ranking Democrat on the Aviation Subcommittee. He is also very apropos to this discussion, the co-founder of the U.S.-China Working Group, which was founded in 2005, and I had the great pleasure of working with Rick on these issues and being a part of that group. Rick has traveled to China 9 times, met many of the leaders, and has real insights into what's going on there. When I co-chaired the U.S.-China Working Group, I traveled with Rick, and on one occasion, Rick and I actually sat down and really did some intense negotiations with the senior leadership of the PLA at a banquet. And after a number of shots of Baijiu, we negotiated our opportunity to be the first American civilians to get a full tour of a Chinese submarine. So I would just submit to you that if you really want to solve this China trade issue, let Rick and I take care of it. I think we can do a pretty good job for you. But by the way, Rick, on the website for the U.S.-China Working Group, we still have pictures from that trip, which thank you for keeping me sort of involved in all that. But anyway, I give you Congressman Rick Larsen from the great state of Washington. Rick's going to make some opening comments, and we'll go to Q&A.
Thanks, Charles. Thanks. And thanks for that applause. I appreciate it. It's good to see Charles again land on his feet. served his district well in the U.S. House, and he was a great partner as well as the co-chair of the U.S.-China Working Group. He was the second Republican co-chair, Mark Kirk, before that, and now Darren LaHood is the Republican co-chair. I've been the co-chair, the Democratic co-chair since 2005, so I've had a chance to visit China many times. As Charles said, our last visit was in September, and I think on that visit, 6 members of Congress went, including myself, and the other 5, it was their first trip to China. So part of the U.S.-China Working Group's goal, we're trying to get members of Congress to actually go to China. And what I tell folks is that what you learn from your first trip to China is that you better go again, because it is a very dynamic, that is a constantly changing country in terms of its economy, in terms of its policy these days on some things. But it's a critical economic relationship for the United States. And I want to put that in some context of what's going on today, at least from my perspective. This is my assessment. These are not comments that I've had with anybody in the Democratic or Republican leadership. Usually when I speak, it's usually what I have to say. It's one of the great things about being in the U.S. Congress. You're basically a free agent in terms of developing your own ideas and say what you want to say, regardless of party orthodoxy or doctrine. And so it also, I think these comments reflect a lot about where I come from. And Charles covered a little bit about that from Washington State. So it's a pleasure to be here. I'll give 5 minutes of comments and take some questions. I apologize for being late. As you know, members of Congress, we have our own limo drivers. And mine was a little slow getting here. That is Metro. And which I take every day. And today just happened to be a slower day. That's fine. So to start, I guess to start with just a kind of in-your-face comment a little bit that may not come as a surprise that I've been opposed and continue to try to change the administration's actions on the 232 and 301 tariff case, as well as have a lot of concerns about what seems to be a direct effort to prevent the WTO from actually functioning as a rules adjudicator, trade rules adjudicator. And as well, it's my assessment that the U.S. has been developing now a much more protectionist trade policy than we've had in the past, and the consensus on trade is somewhat falling apart. I've said before, I'll say again, I think this is an approach that's straight out of the 80s, and by that I mean 1880s.
1780s.
Well, I was proven right when the president actually referred to the McKinley Act of 1890 in making the 232 announcement, honoring one of the most protectionist pieces of legislation in the 19th century. So I was off by a year, but not off by all that much. This is a tit-for-tat focused trade policy, in my view, that has real consequences, especially in trade-dependent states. But I would argue that every state is a trade-dependent state. Washington State is, as Charles said, trade-dependent. 40% of the jobs in our state depend on trade. And in fact, reports both by the Peterson Institute and by Brookings have identified Snohomish County, the county that I was born and raised in and in part represent in Congress. It's the county just north of Seattle. Everybody seems to know where Seattle is for some reason. It's the county north of there. My district is the one north of Seattle, and it's not near Moose Jaw or Medicine Hat. It's actually in America, not Canada. There are places north of there. And Snohomish County would be the hardest hit county in a trade war, according to these reports. The Peterson report, in fact, identified that we would lose 5% of the jobs in Snohomish County if there was an all-out trade war with China. 5% may not seem like a lot, but it is a huge number. And the reason for that is because the largest exporter and the largest manufacturer in the United States has a major facility there, it's Boeing. And 23,000 Boeing employees who live in my district go to work there every day. Another 13,000, so about a total of 36,000 Boeing employees work there every day. Those are the folks who are assembling airplanes for sale, not just to domestic carriers, but to carriers around the world. And China is, you can look at any public document on the future of the aerospace market. China is the single largest market for airplanes along in the future. So you can see why a trade war would have a huge impact where I'm from. Charles went through some of the numbers. Washington State itself exported $16.5 billion of goods to China in 2016, a 300% increase since 2005. But these impacts on the tariff policy won't be solely felt with respect to U.S. trade relations with China. We've seen some of the consequences of the 232 policy in the form of retaliation against farmers, against businesses which do not produce steel or aluminum. We've also seen impacts of the 232 strategy on other trading partners and allies as well, all seeking exemptions from 232. So discussions like we're having today provide a really important opportunity to, prove the United States and prove that the United States that we're still committed to setting the rules of trade, that we still want to be forward-thinking in setting the rules of trade, and that there are folks in Congress that are pushing back against the current approach. I just think we have a lot to lose if we don't. Also, another concerning element is that the president's recent tweet on the ZTE case, which is now tying something that has been specifically a national security issue, a punishment, sanctions on ZTE. That was a case that started in Commerce under the Obama administration and continued, rightfully so, under the Trump administration, as a sanctions for violating, a punishment for violating sanctions that the U.S. had imposed. And now the president seems to have also included the idea that we will use a national security issue as trade bait in order to forward what he is defining as the U.S. interest in trade. So it's not just, I think, the use of the 232 and 301 cases, but it's spilling over into direct national security cases that is confusing the trade playing field, in my view. So what do you do about this? What's going on? How do we approach this? I guess there's an analogy that I like to use, and that's for those who didn't play high school football, it's all right. It wasn't all that great. But you're given a playbook, and where I went to school, the playbook was like 3 pages long. Like, hand off to that guy and get out of his way. But you're given a playbook, and a playbook has offense in it and it has defense in it. And right now, I think we're playing a lot of defense instead of going on offense. We're worried about things instead of doing something about them. And when it comes to this vast relationship that we have with China, there are things that we can do on offense. Some of them are trade related, some of them are not. But we need to think broadly in how we're approaching this relationship. And so the first thing, I've got a laundry list. This is just a few examples. There's a lot of concern about these Confucius institutes and universities and the ability to teach a Chinese language and Chinese culture, and developing a next generation of folks who are interested in China, and whether or not I don't want to debate whether or not these Confucius institutes are doing all the nefarious things that folks say they are or they aren't, but what we aren't doing in the United States is enough federal funding for our colleges and universities to develop Chinese language and Chinese culture programs, so that we don't have to worry about, literally outsourcing our Chinese language and culture programs in college to the Confucius Institutes, but rather develop them ourselves. And there are ways in the budget, there are avenues in the federal budget that we can use to do that. Second, I just want to point out is the American Chamber of Commerce in 2017 annual report concluded that businesses are generally upbeat on trade with China, but that 75% of their members do feel foreign companies are less welcome now than in the past. So there's a very real concern about this. And Now, there are a lot of things we can do to address these concerns. Again, I don't think the 232 and 301 approach is addressing these concerns. We can go on offense. One way to go on offense is trying to reinvigorate the bilateral investment treaty negotiations, the BIT negotiations, so that we have something, so that we are aiming for something longer term and more positive and more structurally, that maybe change things structurally in the future. We're focused on a lot of things. Another thing to think about is the Bicameral Build Act in Congress would help maximize the approach the U.S. is taking to finance development in lower and middle-income countries. This could be a response to China's Belt Road Initiative. There are a lot of concerns on Capitol Hill about the Belt Road Initiative, but nothing being done about it. Well, one thing we can do is offer in the United States, offer our own, if you will, Belt Road Initiative. I wouldn't call it that, but by maximizing the tools that we already have in the federal government to help with development in these lower middle income countries. And we have these tools, we don't use them very well, we don't fund them very well, but the Build Act, which is lead sponsor is Ted Yoho from Florida, Republican from Florida, would actually refashion some of those tools that we have in the federal government to put us really back in the game. And I think finally, I wouldn't be, he probably wouldn't have let me on stage, but I didn't say this next thing. And that's, we need to find a way to get back into TPP and make it TPP 12 instead of TPP 11. I think it was only last week, 2 weeks ago, I don't know, what's today, I don't know. As you might know, it's an election year, so a couple weeks back I was doing my campaign kickoff events, and I was in this one county. I won't say which county in case someone's here, but I was in this one county, and I got this question about would I support TPP now? And this is a county, this is a place, it's a liberal hotbed of a place, and they are not pro-trade up there at all. And I said, yes, I would. We need to get back in that. We need to get back in it because it's getting out of it has clearly shown, if you didn't believe me before, it's clearly shown that we're losing a strategic advantage in Asia by letting the vacuum get filled by China. China as a country and as an economy will play in that area long in the future, as we will. So it's not like it's a big threat, except that the rules now are going to be set by the TPP 11 and China, as opposed to the TPP 12 and China. TPP 12 means we're in the game, helping set those rules instead of outside. I actually got applause in this county. In this group. I was surprised. The people who worked for me on my campaign were just shocked that not everybody applauded this line, but some people, if you talk about it enough and explain it enough, some people will understand that that we are a trade country, we're a trade state, we're a trade district, and they'll support it. But we have to do a better job talking about it. So those are just some things. There'll be a huge impact if it's an outlaw trade war with China. Huge impact where I'm from. But the flip side is, I think we're playing too much defense. We're much too tactical. We're not being strategic and playing offense, and that's, I think, where the difference is with me.
Well, thank you, Rick. So we'll go to some questions and answers now, and I'll start off with a few questions.